Well, this was so much fun, I want to do it again. This was my Vicky's favorite book, Old Witch Rescues Halloween. Old Witch sat cracking black walnuts in the attic of the old jug and muffin tea room. The nights were growing colder, and the smells of apples and corn stalks filled the skies. Only one more night until Halloween. One night, Old Witch's eyes glowed brighter. Every once in a while, she hopped about in a stiff little witch's jig. Point your toe, skip and prance, it's Halloween and time to dance. But now she stopped. Downstairs, she heard the door bang. It was her friend Nikki. Now she knew it was Nikki. Ever since the night that he and his mother had found her fast asleep in the chimney of the lonely old house, Nikki had been her friend. And she knew by the way the door slammed that something was wrong. Old witch, Nikki called. Old Witch heard the alarm in Nikki's voice. Down the stairs she clattered to join the breathless boy and his mother. What could have happened? It's Mr. Butterbean! Mr. Butterbean chased me, he gasped. He chased me with a stick. He smashed my pumpkin. Nikki faced Old Witch, and his voice began to shake. Mr. Butterbean said there won't be any Halloween in Old Wick tomorrow night. No Halloween. Nikki's mother, Nikki and Old Witch stared at one another. They couldn't believe their ears. They knew that Mr. Butterbean was mean. They knew he chased children. And they also knew that people usually did what he told them to do because he owned most of the town of Old Wick. He's going down to a town meeting tonight and tell the mayor that there will be no Halloween in Old Wick, said Nikki. Old Witch cracked her knuckles and rolled her eyes. Suddenly, she turned and clambered back upstairs. Poor Old Witch, she loves Halloween, said Nikki. Poor dear Old Witch. Halloween is her night, said Nikki's mother. Upstairs, Old Witch crashed about. From under her bed, she pulled a tin box of strange red powder. From an earthen crock, she took a hank of hair. And from behind a beam, she took 3 dried seeds. Hacking wildly, she tucked them away in her cape and sang a little song. Snakes, knees, toads, and Ratchatfatch. Old Butterbean has met his match. She winked at the crow outside her window. In Old Wick, Butterbean let everyone know that he planned to do a town hall that night. The bad news spread rapidly, and all day, all the people of Old Wick worried that Mr. Butterbean would do just what he said. They worried there would be no Halloween. At dusk, as the town lights came on, unhappy children and their anxious parents walked to the town hall. Nicky and his mother quickly cleaned up the tea room so they could be at the meeting in time. Old Witch scowled angrily, scooted on ahead. She took her favorite shortcut through the woods, past the great house called Butterbean Manor. The moon was beginning to rise, but the path was dark. In front of the mansion, a crow called an alarm, and the old witch stopped. She cupped an ear to catch the warning. She's right in front of the manor. Too late, too late. Whoosh, whoosh. And a blanket was thrown over her. Kicking and shrieking, she was bundled off to Butterbean Manor. And up the stairs to a room high in the tower. Before she could fight her way out of the blanket, she heard a key locking the door. Spluttering, Old Witch made her way to the window and flung it open. Far below, she saw Mr. Butterbean driving off to the meeting hall. And there's the witch up in the tower. And there's Butterbean headed out. Snake's knees, she rasped. My broom, I'll fly down. Where was her broom? It must be back on the path, she thought. For a minute, it seemed all was lost, but only for a moment. Old Witch leaned out of the window and whistled. The great black crow that never seemed to be very far from her flew to the sill. Old Witch, with a whispered word, sensed the huge crow swooping into the woods. In a moment, he came struggling back with the broom in his claws. Beautiful bird, she squawked, and now, perched on her broom, Old Witch soared out of the window towards the town hall. In the center of the town, the meeting had begun. Mr. Butterbean was shaking his cane at the crowd. Beside him on the platform, Old Witch's mayor looked very upset. Down with Halloween, shouted Butterbean. Down with noisy children. Down with trick-or-treats. There will be no Halloween in Old Witch this year. But, Mr. Butterbean, squeaked the mayor, wiping his glasses unhappily. No Halloween, Butterbean bellowed. Some children began to cry. Where was Old Witch? After all, Halloween was really her night. And where was she? Just then, there was a huge swoosh into the town hall. And in sailed Old Witch, trailing a lace curtain from Butterbean Manor behind her. She flew over the heads of the people and straight to the speaker's platform, knocking off hats and overturning chairs as they went. The children shrieked with joy. Old Witch came to a shrieking stop in front of Mr. Butterbean. Mr. Butterbean could hardly believe his eyes. He'd left her locked in the tower. He stared in amazement at Old Witch. How could she have escaped from the tower, he says. Then his fury returned. He snatched a pitcher of water from the speaker's table and dumped it on Old Witch. "Troublemaker," he shouted. For a minute, Old Witch just dripped and dripped and dripped and dripped. And then, with water squishing in her toes and in her shoes, she broke into a furious jig. Her eyes glittered and she hissed, "Spiders, snakes' knees, and witches' grog. Butterbean is a bright green frog." Whoosh! And there went Mr. Butterbean. While Butterbean continued his shouting, Old Witch reached into her cape and threw a powder into the air. In the middle of a shout, Butterbean changed. He wanted to say "down with Halloween," but it came out "down with Groink, 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 Groink." Butterbean was a little tiny frog. "Groink," said Mr. Butterbean. It was a very small groink, because suddenly Mr. Butterbean was a very small frog. No one could even see him at Old Witch's feet. All they knew was Old Witch was there, and she was in charge. "All right," she squawked. "All those in favor of spooky, scary Halloween say snake's knees." "Snake's knees," shouted the crowd. "All those in favor of cider and donuts say ratchafratch." "Ratchafratch," they all roared. Then Old Witch bent down and seemed to mumble something at her feet. There was a flash, a puff of smoke, and there stood Mr. Butterbean again, with a fearful look at the witch. "Hurrah for Halloween!" "Hurrah for Butterbean!" someone shouted. "Hurrah for the Old Witch!" everyone else shouted. Halloween was a clear, frosty blue night, and the moon rose full and orange, just like it's supposed to do this year. Children dressed in beautiful costumes, pirate costumes, ghost costumes, scared one another and gathered treats until their bags were overflowing. Even at Mr. Butterbean's house, there were all kinds of treats and fun things to do. Plates of sugar donuts, sweet apple cider, and spicy pumpkin pies. Old Witch stopped in for a moment to test the cider. She might have stayed longer if some children visiting from out of town hadn't pulled on her nose. "Take off your mask," they said. "Let me see your real face." "Ratcha-fratch," she squawked loudly and stamped out of the house. The wind was in the trees and a black cat yowled. "My night! Halloween," she cackled. And then, as through the sounds of the night's call, she rose into the dark black sky, yelling, "Ratcha-fratch!" Happy Halloween. I hope you've enjoyed my story, And Vicki, I hope you enjoyed me retelling Old Witch Rescues Halloween. Happy Halloween!